The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone, to tonight's free Pay It Forward Mercury Retrograde webinar from EAN. We're pleased that you joined us tonight. We have Kimmery standing by. We are going to kind of fully explore what should be a very exciting holiday month here with a lot going on with Mercury Retrograde. So thanks for tuning in, and Kimmery will take it from here.
And yes, it did automatically start recording, Leroy.
Great. Yep, we're good.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius, as Leroy said. This is a very active Mercury retrograde, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started and move through our materials. First of all, one housekeeping slide. Here's the 3 ways that you can study with us at EAN. You can listen to the free weekly audio podcasts that we post from our website and on iTunes. You can subscribe to any section of our Astro Library. There are 3 of them that are listed right there. You can subscribe 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or you can do a monthly recurring that then you would cancel at any time. And of course, we also have our Evolutionary Astrology course and its 3 segments. And right now through December, we're running a special 25% off on any of the materials of the course. And again, this is each of these 3 sections. Upon checkout, you would put in the coupon code Capricorn. If you have any questions on our materials or Astro Library, you can always contact us at evolutionaryastrology.net, or you can call us at 605-348-5111. So why planetary retrogrades in general? They are a geocentric or Earth-centered phenomena of apparent motion. In other words, from our perspective here on Earth, some of those planets, if we really watch them in the sky, they'll appear to slow down, reverse themselves for a while before they then turn and go forward again. Anytime we have one of these retrogrades going on with a planet, it is when that planet is closest to us here on Earth. These planetary retrogrades cause a withdrawal or status quo, that it is offering us an opportunity to redefine how that planetary archetype is going to operate for us according to our own individual laws. In other words, planetary retrogrades offer us that opportunity to break free and align with our own individual nature versus the consensus conditionings that each and every one of us on planet Earth is subject to by the very nature of having parents, society, religion, politics, law, etc. A planetary retrograde is always a non-static archetype. It's always evolving. You would look to the sign in the house of where the planet is retrograde to see how it is operating for you. And you go to the opposite sign in house to see where you are looking for your own individual clarity and expression and breaking free to be yourself. Now, a transiting retrograde planet is always related back to the natal planetary archetype. Wherever that is in your chart by house sign aspects. If you happen to have been born during a Mercury retrograde, then you will experience a temporary harmony anytime Mercury is retrograde by transit. Here's some visuals for you. Although we know that the Earth revolves around the sun, again, from our perspective, planets will appear to go retrograde. I'll show you that the next sign. But here is where you can see why Mercury is never more than 29 degrees away from the sun. When you first start studying astrology, you hear that You can have Mercury either the sign before, the sign of, or the sign after whatever your sun sign is. And the reason why is because how close Mercury is to the sun compared to the Earth. Mercury's revolution around the sun is once every 88 days. This will then, as it interacts with Earth, create 3 to 4 retrograde cycles per year. And those retrograde periods will be anywhere from 20 to 24 days, and Mercury will appear to stand still in the sky for 1 day when it turns retrograde or direct. Here's how you would see it if you were watching it in the sky. Here's where Mercury enters pre-shadow, the date where it's going to go direct. Here it is moving forward in the sky. Here's where it appears to stand still, go backwards or retrograde. This is the second passage through those 24 degrees. Here it is going direct, and here's post-shadow until it reaches that point where it first went retrograde and then moves beyond it. This is how you would visually see it in the sky if you looked at that every single night during a Mercury retrograde cycle. Mercury retrograde patterns. Mercury retrogrades through the elements of the zodiac. In other words, Mercury's retrogrades go from water to air to earth to fire. It spends approximately 1 year doing retrogrades in one element, the next year transitions. For instance, 2017, our retrograde cycle started in Earth reversing to fire, and we're ending in the fire element, as in the fact that Mercury is retrograde entirely in Sagittarius, this retrograde cycle. Forgot to say that. December 2nd, 3rd, depending on where you are in the United States, until December 22nd is Mercury's retrograde cycle. Mercury goes retrograde at 29 degrees Sag. It's going to go direct at 13 degrees Sag. Next year, 2018, those retrograde cycles are going to start in fire, and they're going to end up in the fire to water reversing elements. There's a little bit on the two archetypes of Mercury. At this point in time, Mercury rules 2 signs and 2 houses of the zodiac. Rulership of Gemini in 3rd house is the outer Mercury. This is coming from the active polarity and the air element. Both of Mercury's rulerships, Gemini and Virgo, are the archetype of the conscious mind and the left brain. This outer Mercury, though, is consumed with classifying the phenomenal physical world. It wants to give everything a word. It wants to put facts and figures together. This outer Mercury rules all forms and devices of language and communications. In addition to speaking and writing, you can put down your computer, your cell phone, even your vehicle, because that is a form of movement that we all that many of us have some form of movement, whether we own a car or we ride the bus or the train or etc. Another thing about the outer side of Mercury is it works through cycles of expansion and contraction, and this is exactly what we have with Mercury retrograde. We reach a saturation point of taking in information. During a Mercury retrograde, we contract, go inward, and release the fluff. Typical words with Mercury and rulership of Gemini 3rd house, the debater, being clever and curious, versatile. Of course, many of you see the twins from that symbol that you see in the background here for Gemini. Mercury can be excitable, the trickster, adaptable, talkative, argumentative. Mercury's rulership of Gemini in the 3rd house also is showing us the relativity of truth and is there to expose any weak links. And this is coming from that polarity, Sagittarius 9th house ruled by Jupiter. The inner side of Mercury ruling Virgo in the 6th is, as you see on your screen, the passive polarity. Both are mutable, Virgo and Gemini. And here, the passive polarity and the earth element. Still the conscious mind, left brain, but with the Virgo 6th house side, the inner side of Mercury, we gain this ability to analyze, to self-reflect, to adapt, to change. however we need to. This is the archetype of self-improving, being able to learn how to discriminate, and purifying ourselves. Coming through thousands of years of patriarchal conditionings, this is also one of the archetypes of sadomasochism, the other one being Pisces 12th house and ruler Neptune. Sadomasochism is conditioned guilt that is linked to either atonement, victimization, or anger and victorization. I'm going over this very fast. And one of the biggest things that happens with this sadomasochism distortion is it really intensifies that part of Virgo that from self-improvement we can see what's wrong and what needs to change. One of those keywords becomes criticism, whether it's inner criticism, always tearing ourselves down, inner reflecting outer criticism of others as well. Other keywords, the nervous system, both outer and inner Mercury will relate to the nerves. The worrywart, anxiety, self-doubt, procrastination. However, Virgo in the 6th house, being that immutable modality, is where we are really learning how to have service to another person, to a group or society in general, and this is bringing in that polarity of the whole. Pisces 12th house with ruler Neptune. So when Mercury goes retrograde in general again, we're releasing excess thought because our mind is saturated. It's hard to take information in. It's hard to process anything. It's time to review and release any worn out mental patterns that you would like to let go of. It is a time period for turning inward and quieting our mind, which may be easier said than done in this particular Mercury retrograde with all the aspects it's going to make from Sag to every other planet. Here is where, though, it's time to learn to think for ourselves. And Mercury retrograde is about trusting intuition first and then following through with logic or facts afterwards. Because Mercury retrograde points us from left brain to right brain. Ruler of Gemini points to Sag and its ruler Jupiter. The ruler of Virgo points us to Pisces and its ruler Neptune. So the entire mutable quadrant gets activated whenever Mercury's retrograde, regardless of what sign or signs it is transiting retrograde. Again, finding quiet time in that busyness of the retrograde overload that can come through. Having studied astrology for 30 plus years, I have learned that Mercury retrograde flow and how sometimes I just need 5 minutes outside. And yet I also have to take time to pay attention to those details and move through them regardless of Mercury retrograde. So here's that balance of quiet time and the busyness. And of course, as many of you probably also know, Mercury retrograde is the time to have a communication again and again and again and again and again until there's clarity and common ground. Mercury retrograde is that time period to figure out how to do something the healthiest way, so that you can do it fully one time rather than having to just repeat it again and again and again. And of course, this is the time period to find how we want to implement new mental patterns and actions, how we want to introduce a new idea or a new attitude into our world. And through that chaos of Mercury retrograde, it is the best time ever to start something new. It's a good time to have astrology sessions. It's a good time to start a new exercise routine. It's a good time to implement some new action that you've been thinking about. Everything is so mentally thrown up into the air. It shakes up the old energy And with effort, as that clarity comes through, with effort, you can really set up new patterns on how you really would like to go forward. Now, here's the key dates and degrees with this Mercury retrograde in Sag. I've always followed a Mercury cycle from the exterior conjunction to exterior conjunction. Mercury and Venus both operate within the orbit of the Earth, so they never have oppositions to a planet. So we last had Mercury superior conjunction October 8th at about 16 Libra. Mercury entered that pre-shadow November 14th at 13 degrees Sag. Here we are, just getting ready to go retrograde again. As I said, December 2nd, 3rd, 29 degrees Sag. I will say more about this interior retrograde conjunction that is coming December 12th at 21 degrees Sag. I got a slide on that coming up. Of course, here's Mercury direct right after the winter solstice, 13 Sag, post shadow. We're going to feel this Mercury retrograde until January 10th. And by the way, these dates right here, November 14th and January 10th, when Mercury enters pre-shadow, leaves post-shadow, they can be just as active as the dates that Mercury actually turns retrograde and direct. And my rule of thumb is you allow 3 days, the day before, the day of, the day after, with Mercury retrograde or entering and leaving shadow. And of course, the highlight, the aha moment of any planetary retrograde is when that planet makes either the conjunction or opposition to the sun, which again, I'll give you a slide on this coming up in mid-December here. Here is a generic chart for the Mercury retrograde that is going to happen. I like to use 0 degree Aries houses because you can just easily reflect on this all over, no matter where you are. Mercury, again, is going to aspect 7 planets 3 times each, and 2 of those 7 planets actually have 2 aspects, Mars and Jupiter. Mercury will have 6 aspects to Mars and 6 aspects to Jupiter. That's how active it's going to be. Just drawing on your screen here, here is the Mercury retrograde just after it makes a conjunction to Saturn. Mercury turns stationary retrograde really, really close to Saturn here. So this in and of itself is just lending such a reality check for us, Saturn. And the whole Sagittarian themes of truth versus lies. Now what's interacting with that is the fact that Saturn is finishing up last quarter squares to Chiron, so Mercury's going to have 3 last quarter squares. Saturn is finishing up waning trines to Uranus. Mercury's going to have 3 waning trines to Uranus. These 3 planets, Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, they're probably the most active out of these 7 planets during Mercury's retrograde. And as you're going to see as we go through here, where's the truth? Where's the truth? What's the lie? What's the truth? And if you've been paying any attention to social media or the news in the United States, we have a president who is just full of it right now in saying anything, regardless of whether there is an ounce of truth in it. I think what will happen during this Mercury retrograde, if not already at Mercury stationary retrograde, is there's just this detachment that's going on at the insaneness of this person. I mean, where the media is even starting to come out and saying, is this guy going off the rocks or something? May very well be with what's going on politically behind the scenes in the investigation into Russia, and former members of his campaign and cabinets now making deals with the special prosecutor investigating everything. Mercury turns stationary retrograde smack dab on a full moon. Emotions are going to be strong. You want to take some time to just watch where you're going, defend, drive, dot your I's, cross your T's, take a deep, deep breath. And Mercury stationary retrograde, you might want to save yourself a few arguments. It may not be worth it to try and convert and convince right now. It might be better if you just find a way to be in nature and take some deep breaths as we move through this full moon. And just observe what's going on out there on that world stage we're in. Again, Mercury retrograde this year was in the fire signs 4.5 months. This is including the 2 months here of Mercury in Sagittarius, November 5th, 17th through January 10th, 2018. And it also was in earth signs for 4 months of this year. Mercury retrograde in the fire signs where we are with Sag, it is again going to stir up all those communications and arguments. Fire is just always active, moving energy, so it increases our sense of impatience. It can create that refusal or inability to listen. And remember, Mercury retrograde is inner and outer listening. In Sag, we can be very defensive about beliefs, and yet it's supposed to be about reviewing the larger picture and really contemplating what's a lie versus what is truth. Mercury retrograde in Sag, very briefly, need for self-honesty and deep philosophical reflections about every area of our life. Your beliefs affect your career, your finances, your relationships, parenting, politics, the environment. There is an area that isn't covered by our beliefs and philosophical orientations. They're up for review and they're up for change. How honest can you be with yourself? And we will do this through, again, both inner and outer conversations with those in our lives. The truth versus lies theme is going to be exposed both individually and collectively. It is very strongly activated in Donald Trump's chart. I'll show you slides on this in a little while. Polarity on issues of truth versus lies are just going to become magnified to the point that many might be able to recognize something that they thought was a truth before and are going, oh, I guess I need to change my mind, or I need to take a deeper look at this. No matter where we are on the evolutionary scale, it would be important to do that. Can you detach from where you get frustrated in your areas of life, regardless of where they are personally or collectively, and take some time this month to reflect on them? What can happen, Mercury retrograde in Sag, is people can become so excited that they can't listen, that fire element, or they can become so angry over any righteousness on it that they can't listen. And of course, anytime we have a Mercury retrograde, those issues with all those devices that we use, computers, cell phones, cameras, iPads, printers, the electricity in the house, whatever the little, oh gosh, what do they call those things that run all of our, devices? I mean, the people who buy the little devices where you say, Alexa, turn on the music, all of those types of things get affected. And what we have seen so much in 2017 is all the hacking incidents that have been in the news. If you haven't been aware of this, Uber was hacked about, what was it? 9 months ago or something like that, and it just made it into the news this week. Mercury pre-shadow turning retrograde. So we're finding that there is a vulnerability anywhere you have all of the electronic stuff. One of the other things that's been going on is here in the U.S., as the Republicans have taken control of everything in the administration, they are trying to do away with net neutrality. And they're also doing away with the subsidies in low income areas, being able to have an ease of internet access, be it via computers and broadband or via your cell phones, for instance. Where I come from in western South Dakota, 10% of our population is Native American. And so, you know, we have two of the poorest counties in our country. So our Native American reservations, which tend to be their own counties, are going to be very strongly affected by taking away their ability to have information and news, Gemini Sag, easily accessible to them. On a positive note, Chattanooga, isn't that Tennessee? Chattanooga, I think that's Tennessee.
Yep.
They were given a federal grant to create. There's a word for it, and I can't. Well, the language is that they were giving a federal grant to create free internet for their entire community and area. And of course, they're part of that Appalachian area where they also have, you know, the lower income people. And so they are running the internet as a public utility completely free. And they've made these huge investments to upgrade the equipment. So for instance, when you go to download a movie, 3 seconds to download a movie. Your download and upload are like outrageously fast. This has been hugely successful, be it from the city to the citizens to the businesses, everything. There all kinds of savings of money and increased revenues in a variety of ways. And of course, the major multi-global companies have been trying to sabotage it. So if you're interested in that and you're hearing this, this would be something to really check out and see how well they're doing it. And it could be replicated all over. And you wouldn't have to pay anything for cable, and you wouldn't have to pay anything to use your Wi-Fi. Amazing little piece of information there if you want to go research it on the internet, Mercury retrograde. So, retrograde in Sag, it's time for Mercury to have philosophical discussions around sexual harassment with Jupiter in Scorpio. I'm beginning to think that this issue is going to last all year long, meaning that zodiacal year of Jupiter in Scorpio. It's bringing up all kinds of questions and discussions around the morality of the inequality between women and men, not to mention religious and spiritual reviews and discussions as well. And if you've been watching things, you can see that if a Republican's been accused of sexual harassment, Democrats scream bloody murder. If a Democrat's been accused of sexual harassment, the Republicans scream bloody matter, bloody whatever. It'll be interesting to see where this goes over the next month, because how are you going to pick and choose who to fire and who to have a ethics investigation on you know, taking it all the way to the White House. You know, there we could end up having to revisit this. One of the big areas to be watching this, of course, is the special election December 10th, which will come right before Mercury's interior conjunction to the sun for the Alabama Senate seat. And of course, if you're not familiar, Alabama has been, it's been a Republican seat in the Senate for 40 years, and the gentleman running, Roy Moore, he is a lawyer who became a federal judge. He was taken away, his judgeship was taken away twice over not following the law, Sagittarius, and there have been, I don't remember the number, let's just say 5, 10, 12 women that have come out and spoken about sexual harassment as young females, some of them underage, when he was in his late 20s, early 30s. That'll be an interesting election to watch. We will see where that midterm tide will be going through the midst of this. But Mercury retrograde in Sag is just going to bring this whole issue of fairness between men and women up into the air. It'll be interesting to see where this goes. Anytime we have Mercury retrograde, media's in the news, and it just so happened that Sagittarius rules journalism and publishing. So expect more and more things to come through. Are you tired of the word or the phrase truth versus lies yet? As we've had Saturn in Sagittarius for the last few years, as we have seen the statements made by the President of the United States. So there's going to be this real discussion of fact-based journalism versus propaganda journalism. And we're seeing almost a resurgence in the news-orientated, like newspaper-orientated journalism that, of course, is now went online so much, as well as what they print. You know, that stuff in it of itself is going to be so much up in the news right now. There was a conservative group that did secret recordings of Planned Parenthood and tried to expose them for selling baby parts from abortions, created an investigation. There was never any charges from it, regardless of how the groups tried to do it. Same group tried to have a woman go in and do a con job on the Washington Post by trying to say she was raped and had an abortion by this candidate, Roy Moore, in Alabama. And the Washington Post carried through with the facts, realized what was going on, and exposed it just in this last day or two. So these are the types of things that Mercury in Sag retrograde, Mercury in Sag general, brings out. And because it's going to have these 2 months with the retrograde cycle here, it emphasizes it more. You can't miss it unless you're out in nature and refusing to be part of the electronic world. And if you are, hallelujah, good for you. So all kinds of things in that area, including other things that may happen with social media. Trump has been receiving global criticism today for tweeting 3 videos claiming horrific acts by Muslims. And of course, now as there's this big search over the details of these videos to see if they're based upon any facts or truth to them. This is going to get to a point, I think, next year, and I think some of it is this tail end of Saturn and Sag, right now, 27, 28, 29, 30 degrees of Saturn in Sag up until December 19th when it goes into Capricorn, where we're just going to see this intensity of the lie. I think we're going to see some pendulum swings over the course of this winter in people who just say enough is enough. I hope so. All these multiple aspects that Mercury retrograde is going to make, it's going to create the need to make a conscious effort, even more so with Sagittarius, fire element, excitability, to really quiet down on a personal level, to really listen inwardly to our own intuition in whatever kind of a situation that may be going on in your world, in your life. And what it will create is a need to trust your own instinct when it comes through, and to seek to understand first. One of the phrases of Sagittarius is the teacher versus the preacher. The teacher seeks to learn, to then share its knowledge and wisdom. The preacher seeks to convert and control. So you're going to be reviewing where this may be happening in your own life. Can you quiet down? Can you just go out and take a walk? Can you get out in nature and breathe deep? Because Sagittarius rules nature, and it rules natural spiritual principles. So it's so important that we make that effort to balance ourselves.
Kim?
Just
checking in with you on this early part of the Mercury retrograde period. Obviously, you have a great fire trine in the sky here coming up next week. And one of those points is where the solar eclipse took place in August, correct?
Yep.
Well, if you have a slide for that, just let me know. But we have somebody, I'm interacting on the board with somebody who was interested in what that impact might be.
We're going to have that trine in fire, Leo, Sag, Aries, Leo, Sag, activated all the way through the Mercury retrograde. It is going to be strongest at Mercury stationary direct. And so, if I may, or we can, I'll show you with Donald Trump's chart, and I'll show you with the Mercury stationary direct chart of where this will be activated. There's two themes that are going on. More of the same, and getting so filled up with the chaos and the lie that it just creates a huge shift. Who knows which one is going to win out over Mercury retrograde in Sag. It's something that we're all going to have to watch unfold and participate in. More on that in a few slides down. When Mercury's retrograde in Sag, it's pointing towards Gemini. And again, as we know, that's the outer side of Mercury. That's one of its signs of rulership. So the Gemini polarity says...
Inner side, of course, inner side.
Gemini is the active polarity.
Active, excuse me, sorry.
Okay, I did that last week in Mercury Square, the Nodes Segment 1 class. No, it's Gemini is the outer side of Mercury, third house, outer side of Mercury. So look at how we're having to go back and forth almost again, left brain, right brain. Can we quiet ourselves down, and can we communicate? Can we have that conversation with someone again and again and again and again until we either have clarity or a common understanding? It's also going to point to that need of listening as much as we speak, taking time out to breathe, consider before we move. How would you like to be inside the Donald Trump White House right now, trying to keep our president sane? I mean, you can just imagine how many times you would have to repeat something and repeat it and repeat it, and according to the sayings, be the last one that said it to Donald. You know, I wonder if they're going to have somebody sleep with Donald to keep him off the phone at 4 a.m. Stay tuned. But it does mean that for those of us in our regular lives, it can be that we need to balance being quiet and listening with taking the time to talk and talk and talk and talk. If I may, Leroy has a mother with sun in Gemini. She's got a couple of planets in Gemini. She always gets affected by a Mercury retrograde. She got knocked down just right before Thanksgiving, got a bruise on her face, her shoulder, her ribs. The family is in process of moving them from their house into an assisted living. And bless my husband for taking the time to have the multiple conversations with his mother and calm her down as she is healing and needing to recognize that everything will happen in due process. It's another Gemini Sag thing, recognizing that it's not going to happen instantly. We also, with this Gemini polarity, are going to have to make choices and decisions about where we're going to apply our 24 hours in a day. There's only so much we can do in a day, and we're going to have to make those priorities, make those choices depending upon how we're listening on those intuitive levels. Whenever Mercury's retrograde in fire and air signs, there can be a lot of detail overload. That is fire and air, energy moving out from the center. The fire and air signs are always the active polarity, energy moving out. And so, as we had said even before with Mercury retrograde in general, this is a time period to do it correctly the first time, address it however you need to, versus avoiding it or rushing through it and then having to do it 3 times or 5 times or however many times it is. Leroy and I had one of those hiccups last week with our segment 1 class where we both try to record these webinars so that if one goofs up, we have the other one. And somehow only one got recorded, and we went to convert it, and we moved the laptop, accidentally pressed a button, lost it, had to make multiple phone calls with the support staff. Wasn't completely lost, but it took us a good week to figure it out all the way through Thanksgiving weekend pre-Mercury retrograde shadow. So bless Leroy for being pretty intent as we moved into this week to call back more than once till I got the right staff member who knew something that could help him on that technical side, and that could help him with upgrades and settings, and hopefully everything flowing smoothly. You know what it's like to do these Mercury retrograde webinars? And they're always right before Mercury goes retrograde. Thank goodness we have some humor in that regard. Understanding the natural Gemini cycle of contraction. That's what Mercury retrogrades are, because remember, Gemini always wants one more class, one more conversation, one more book, one more detail, one more thing, and I'm going to put it all together and make sense of it. And so Gemini is cycles of expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction. Mercury retrograde is the natural contraction cycle. So the Gemini polarity pulls us inward, and it pulls us inward to help us reflect on what we want to throw off. how we want to throw off an attitude or a phrase we use all the time, or a instinctive reaction that we always have to something. I was practicing my breathing because Leroy had a doctor's appointment this afternoon, a couple of hours before this webinar, and there have been times in the past where he will pull into the driveway with 10 minutes to spare. And so I was practicing my breathing and going, I'm not going to, I was very smooth on my end, had everything already on my end. And luckily for me, he pulled in 30 minutes before the webinar started. But I noticed myself trying to breathe, trying to calm myself, trying to think differently, trying to say it will energize everything going smoothly. I'm my own example tonight. Gemini polarity, recognizing the relativity of truth. In other words, from the perspective of evolutionary astrology, we all have our personal truth. And sooner or later, we recognize that there is a limitation to it. It's not all the truth. It's not universal truth. And so there's Gemini Sag is always burst in a bubble in something that we firmly believe in, that we find is real for us. And it may have been real truth for us, but sooner or later we outgrow it. And we have to move, we have to expand that pebble dropping into the pond and the ripples moving out. We're always moving out the ripples. And so the Gemini polarity is going to show us where we have a weak link in our truth and where it needs to move beyond that. Not to mention exposing the lies and the con games with a Gemini fact that's indisputable. And of course, if we have some distortions going on, we can refuse to communicate. We double down on the lies. We stay stuck in our version of the truth and refuse to consider any other point of view. Okay, here we go into the aspects, and I put this one in almost every time. In here in evolutionary astrology, we look at aspects from 0 to 360. And so we include a lot of the minor aspects as well, and it makes Mercury a lot more active than we typically see in our astrological calendars. I put this slide in too. This is how we use the 0 to 368 phases with the, I think, 30 aspects that are in there. And you could go even more minute with these aspects if you wanted to, bringing in 9th harmonic, 11th harmonic, not beginner's astrology, but this is the basics of what you want to look at with astrology when you study aspects. Here's a listing of the Mercury aspects, and every one of them is 3 times except for Venus. There's only 2 aspects with a semi-sextile, and there's 1 conjunction, but 2 aspects to Jupiter, Mars, 2 to Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Pluto, and of course the nodes. At the end, I have every single one of these aspects on a list for you in calendar order. Mercury and Venus are quiet this cycle in the number of aspects. There's only 3. It's always the conscious mind Mercury and its values Venus. And when Venus is ahead of Mercury as it is, the mind is forced to support the needs and wants of Venus, even as it is slowing down and taking time to figure out where our beliefs and priorities are with this particular Mercury retrograde cycle in Sag. Here's one of the slides I wanted to show you. That Mercury Venus conjunction December 15th is 1752 Sag. Whoops, that should be Gemini. I wrote that in. I knew that right when I was saying it. Hold on. I gotta put it on my little sheet so that I get that in there as Gemini. Donald Trump will show you in the chart. This should be Gemini. Look at that. 1 minute, this conjunction opposite his Uranus. sudden and upsetting decisions and actions, both Donald Trump initiating them and receiving them. Two subjects, North Korea and the Russian collusion investigation. In addition to that, for him, this is going to be bringing some very sporadic thoughts and communications. 3 days before that, on December 12th, the Mercury retrograde interior conjunction to the Sun, 21 Sag, 14 minutes. Trump's moon, 21 Sag, 12, and his south node, 2048 Sag. This might be the past catching up with him, and it will intensify even more the wild mood swings, meaning the moon. That's some pretty intense aspects. Here's Trump's chart for June 14th, 46. I'm using the 10:54 a.m. time period in Queens, the 29 or 30 degree Leo rising. Here is the Mercury Sun interior conjunction, smack dab on his moon. And of course, Mercury's going to retrograde back to 17 Sag and oppose that 17 degrees Gemini Uranus for Donald Trump. So even more of the same. More communication and legal issues, the lies, confusions, threats, miscommunications. Probably the thing that many of us are starting to recognize and that you're even seeing on the news is there some emotional and mental instability going on. When you have a Gemini Sag opposition like this, and you've got Moon, the emotions, and Uranus, the unconscious mind, the Sun in Gemini here, all these are activated by both Mercury Sun and Mercury Venus conjunctions. You've really got to be able to have some ability to have a grounding to be stable. And as we have known with Trump, and here was where the solar eclipse was, and I'm trying to remember the lunar eclipse, if I remember correctly, was on his Pluto with the sun or moon in Aquarius back there. There was a lunar eclipse right before the solar eclipse across the US, if you remember that. Both eclipses activated Donald Trump. And if you're not aware of this, when you see the sun this close to either north node or south node, it's born on an eclipse. When you see, you can't always tell with the moon, okay? It's got to be the sun. That's the ecliptic, all right? But when you see somebody born on a full moon and the sun is that close to the node, he was born on a lunar eclipse. And as many astrologers will say, when you have an eclipse season, those eclipses, it's not just the day of the eclipse. General rule of thumb is that eclipse is in effect for 6 months until you have the next eclipse season. There are those who feel you can carry it along even further, even up to 2 years after any single eclipse. You can see things being carried forward. Mercury known as the trigger. Look at all these planets in Sag and finishing up right here. I am somewhat of the opinion that this guy is not very stable. If you start looking at some of the astrology that's going on in general, your 12th house Plutos, they in general can have a hard time grounding themselves because it's the Pisces house, it's the water house. They're in that nebulous fantasy world of theirs. And when you put Pluto Leo in there, why do you not see me as I see myself? And of course, as we know with this Mars on the ascendant, and this is the eclipse point, this is how, we're just watching all this play out on this live screen in real life with Donald Trump. Can't even fathom why people don't bow down and worship him. And as you have seen so far, there's no humility, there's no self-reflection, there's no ability to acknowledge everybody else. So yes, this Mercury retrograde cycle is activating within orb here, this transiting north node in Leo. Donald Trump's going to have a nodal axis return here in the next couple of months. That'll be another interesting time period. And of course, here's Uranus retrograde in Aries. So yes, it's not only activating this grand cross that we've been seeing going on all year with Saturn-Uranus trines. Transiting north node's been in there, and they're activating Don's chart, and their Mercury retrograde is extremely activating for it. The only saving grace is the Mars trine, and the question would be, well, and the ascendant descendant, how long will he be able to pull this off? Stay tuned. I have a slide in here specifically for Donald. Pray for peace and send Donald Trump golfing. I would like him to golf the entire month of December. I'd even let him golf all next year. I thought about that and I'm going, you know, there's no capacity to govern or listen. Yes, Leroy?
So does that mean that that's all I have to do next year to get a free golf pass is to just be a little bit more Donald Trumpian?
You're not quite a Trump, sweetie pie. I'm so sorry. I know you're Pluto and Leo. And yes, this solar eclipse was smack dab on your natal Pluto and Leo. For you, that grand trine meant flying through your health care. Yeah, you can golf, honey, but you know how to perform. Sorry, being just a little goofy right here. Let me go through these aspects quickly. Here's a list of Mercury. Okay, Mercury is ahead of Mars. It's waxing to Mars. And so, urge to act will be strong, especially when frustrated. Impulsive communications and actions. There's going to be a need to listen, reflect, and then act. The aspects are going to be the 45-degree semi-square, new phase to crescent that lends us toward reflecting, the waxing sextile in the crescent phase. It says that choices made now can reflect the west of the way around the Mercury-Mars cycle together. But just 6 Mercury-Mars aspects during a retrograde highlight things. Here again, here's one of those Mercury retrograde aspects right there on that South Node moon point in Donald Trump's chart. Here's one trining his ascendant. Let's see how all this turns out. But you get the point. I don't need to belittle it. The other one is Mercury makes the waxing semi-sextile to Jupiter, 30 degrees, new phase, action. And it makes a waxing semi-square, the 45-degree mark turning into crescent phase. And as we all know, Mercury's retrograde in Jupiter's sign. There can be a tendency to increase arguments over who is right and who is wrong. Mercury's retrograde again, Jupiter's sign of rulership and pointing to its own sign of rulership, Gemini. Here's where I come up with that pray for peace. Breathe, slow down, get in nature. And I'm feeling stronger and stronger on this one. When I look at the U.S. conservative tendency in general to be blowhard muscle and create another war and bomb somebody to smithereens, and I look at the instability of our president, I get very concerned how we're going to move through this situation with North Korea. with the two leaders, we might have the pot calling the kettle black. And I will ponder it once in a while and go, oh my gosh, what would happen if one of us sends a nuclear bomb to the other one? I mean, I have found myself being a little more serious in contemplating this than I have, and it just intuitively pops in every so often over this entire last year since the election went down the way it did. And I've read articles where Democratic administrations have really tried to take the negotiations somewhere, and we have an election and it swings the other way, and Republicans just shut down all the communications and negotiations. Not only did we do this from Obama to Trump, I want to say we did it from the Clinton to George Bush, the George W. Bush, if I'm remembering an article correctly, that it was so almost there to really be able to negotiate this whole nuclear war thing. And Bush got elected, and you remember the Cheneys and the Rumsfeld and all of those, right before, and this was before 9/11, when there was a certain doctrine that Rumsfeld had written years ago of, just really wanting to be world cop and, bomb our way to being in charge of everything. Well, those of us in the world of astrology with transiting Pluto, balsamic the U.S. natal Pluto, know, I don't know if that's going to come true or not. The 3 Mercury-Saturn conjunctions. This is bringing in a little bit of seriousness, a little bit of truth. Look at the 3rd conjunction here, coming in at 3 degrees Capricorn at the beginning of Saturn's transit. This is going to have us instinctively searching for, recognizing broader truth, reviewing what it is for ourselves versus the consensus conditionings all around us. Head in the sand, we're going to cling to our version of the truth for security. These Mercury-Saturn conjunctions to me represent the culmination of Saturn's 3-year transit through Sag. And this is dipping in and out with retrogrades with Scorpio and Capricorn. It also is going to be this initiation of Saturn into Capricorn. I look at these aspects on Donald Trump's chart and I just go, whoa, the middle of December, we could be on the brink of things going one way or another, which is why I'm literally saying, pray for peace, energize peace, be peace. Mercury conjunct Saturn, collective lies versus truth, struggle for supremacy. Look at, if you haven't paid attention to this, the one thing where the Trump administration has been very successful is all of the federal judicial appointments they have been making, and these are lifelong appointments, and moving them through the Senate on that 50-48 or 51-50 thing. This is why everybody held their nose and voted for Donald Trump, because they wanted the Supreme Court judge and they wanted the federal judgeships. The other one is how the Trump administration is gutting all of our collective social support systems. I've said this before. Go search Vanity Fair for the Michael Lewis articles on the Department of Interior article was called The Fifth Risk. The latest issue has an article on the USDA and everything that is under the Department of Agriculture, from your food inspections to, I haven't had a chance to read the article yet, but just being an old farm girl, very aware of that. All the different, the various people in all these federal departments who are resigning or the positions are going open. This is, to me, this is this Saturn waning trine Uranus right here. And if you don't know this, the tax cut that they're trying to pass this week will take $1 trillion from Medicaid and $500 billion from Medicare out for you, average U.S. citizens. More on this when I do the Uranus and Taurus series. It's going to be an interesting 2018, being a 2-year, and which way the resource battles and choices go. Just put in these Saturn Uranus trines for you. As you can see the dates on there, and they all took place in Sag and Aries. These Mercury retrograde cycles, we had one a year ago. It activated these trines. This one is activating it as well. It's not all bad with, looking at it from the Trump administration, takes your breath away. But there is, on a little more positive note, we're continuing to adapt to this changing world of the evolution of beliefs. There's broader and broader consensus of people going, wait a minute, you can't judge one bad apple, the whole cart for one bad apple. And everybody's starting to realize not all Muslims are bad, not all Christians are good. We're really seeing, some expansions of that through Saturn and Sag and Uranus and Aries opening up to look at it different ways. Not to mention, again, the creative technological breakthroughs, that are happening. There's a lot of grassroots organizing going on with various social issues, especially after this election, recognizing whether it's the environment or labor or banking or the fight for 15 or whatever the issue is. There's a grassroots uprising that's coming, and we're going to see how it turns out. And I don't know if you're going to be able to call it traditionally the Democratic Party anymore. There are so many issue parties, and Uranus, the collective groups. There are so many issue politics that are arising and that are merging and that are coming out. Remember the elections that were held November 7th, and the surprising people who were elected for a mayor or a state senator in this area and that area. This stuff has also been the Saturn-Uranus trine, and while it's not out there front and center, I do feel this is happening under the on a grassroots level underground. And I feel that the Mercury retrograde is continuing to activate it, even though we just had the last waning trine. Mercury's last quarter squares to Chiron. This is where we continue to have reflection on spirituality and religion. And it's got to be followed through with acting upon these changing beliefs. There's a strong potential here for self-healing or just being the victim again. I haven't just been watching news since the election. I've watched the news for 30, 40 years. But I do find myself really become much more conscious and going, I need to turn that off. I got the information. I need to now do my own reflection, and I've got to do my own healing and keep my own center going. This is Mercury last quarter square Chiron. How is it happening for you? For one person, they may not even look at the news. I also have been talking about this on the podcast. Jupiter and Scorpio's waning sesquisquadrates to Chiron in Pisces. This was also part of exposing all of the sexual harassments. And how are we going to choose to heal with those? Have we reached a turning point? Time will know, time will tell. But there can be themes here with the Mercury retrograde aspects and the Jupiter Chiron aspects of the various areas where we're having societal breakdown, versus renewal. And as we know, reflecting backwards, very rarely is there a leader who actually comes forward and creates change. Most of the time, it's change coming from the bottom up as the masses recognize it. Mercury is making its waning trines to Uranus. So excitability around all kinds of ideas and communication. On the true side, recognizing expanded understandings and so much of our world, finishing up 3 years of Saturn in Sag. On the lie side, how well can we brainwash? Coming up with new ways to spin tales and influence our beliefs. One of the things we also have to be careful of here is arguments leading to impulsive actions, because we have Sag and Aries, 2 fire signs. We can overreact, think later, and what we want to be doing is think before acting. I am of the astrological opinion that trines are not always wonderful and squares are not always bad. It is always going to be observe and correlate, and there can be an ease of getting away with the lie right now. And one of the extreme distortions of this would be passing the tax cut. How many Republicans? How often, if you live in the US here, thank you, international listeners, how much have we heard economists destroy trickle-down and economic theories? And how are we saying if we give these, multi-million, billion-dollar cuts to the billionaires and multi-corporations, you're going to get a job raise? It's BS. But again, if you're interested in that, stay tuned to my Uranus in Taurus series, where I'm really going to get into Jupiter, Scorpio, Uranus, Taurus, and how we really do create prosperity for all. Because if they do pass these tax cuts, it's going to pretty well unstabilize things for the next decade. But just like Mercury retrograde gives us the opportunity to shake it up, the next decade is going to bring us opportunities to really shake things up financially and economically, regardless of whether the tax cut is passed or not. Mercury makes waning semi-sextiles to Pluto. There's 3 of them here in Sag, Capricorn. Every time, Mercury's going to be very close to Donald Trump's South Node and Moon. Mercury's going to make us conjunction to Pluto at 19.5 Capricorn here. This is having us doing some reviews of the material world, more of that have versus have nots. And of course, I won't repeat what's going on, but there can be some deep, practical conversations with the masses of more and more recognizing that, in the 80s, when President Reagan coined the term trickle-down economics, and he didn't coin it, someone else before him did, but he's the one who popularized the term. And Republicans have been using that term now for the last 30, 40 years. It worked the first time in regards to the sales job, even though that wasn't the reality of what turned out. We're now to the 3rd or 4th time of Republicans selling tax cuts this way for the rich. And there's more and more and more of the masses going, but this isn't how it turns out in my world. So I think we're going to see change in that area, even if the mercurial retrograde triggers right now take another decade or 2 to follow through. The north node is making waxing trines to Mercury. South node is making waning sextiles. With the south node to Mercury, 3 aspects. I listed the north node aspects. There's the potential for objectivity in searching for truth. With the north node, there's potential for creative breakthroughs and inspiration. The distortion is both of them getting stuck or remaining stuck in class warfare and inequality because emotional fears, nodal axis, are activated. Here's Mercury stationary direct. And it goes stationary direct again, December 22nd at 13 degrees Sag. But when you start to look at the chart, the thing that really stuck out for me is I knew this, but I saw it visually, and it was like, oh gosh, yeah. This Mercury stationary direct is the reality check everywhere and requiring us wake up, take self-responsibility. Because do you remember the Sun Mercury interior conjunction December 12th at 21 degrees Sag? The Mercury Venus one, December, 15th at 17 Sag. Well, here you are right here. Saturn in Cap, December 19th for the next 2.5 with its retrograde cycles, almost 3 years. Sun in Capricorn, the winter solstice, December 21st. Few hours after the solstice, the Sun-Saturn annual conjunction at 0 degrees Capricorn. And the day after that, Mercury turns stationary direct. And so that whole week of the winter solstice leading up to Mercury stationary direct is kind of, as I've started looking at it, I'm going, oh, so the truth is hitting us, between the eyeball and, oh, this is reality. So stay tuned. Who knows? Maybe we might have a very smooth, easy December and breathe a sigh of relief over the holidays. I don't know, but I look at these aspects and I go, sooner or later, there will be a breaking point with Donald Trump. He's getting more and more extreme. And Capricorn always follows Sag. And that is a, wake-up call. The earth following, fire is always a reality check. We have the inspiration, and then we have the inspiration of fire leads to the earth element of, can we create it? Or was it just an idea whose time has not yet come? Stay tuned. I want to show you the end of my slides, and then I want to see if there's comments or questions from anybody. I just put this in. I use the Gemini rising chart, regardless of which July 4th chart. Mercury is going to make 3 oppositions to Mars in Gemini. I'm going to say one thing and do another. Lies versus truth. What's going to be exposed? It is triggered here by a T-square, 3 first quarter squares, Mercury to Neptune at 22 Virgo. The confusion, where's the truth, where's the lie that could be going on in the U.S. Power struggles, financial upsets, communication polarities. Anything else to tell other than what we've said again? I always like to put questions in with Mercury retrograde. How do I understand universal laws and truth? Where do I choose to act upon my beliefs? How do I listen to those who differ from me? How do I improve my communication skills? How do I teach instead of preach? What creative inspiration am I searching for? How do I create inner peace through any conflict? I'm going to show these. Here's our next Mercury retrograde webinar in March. I like to list 3 Mercury retrogrades out for you so you can see these. As you can see, next Mercury retrograde is going to be in Aries, followed by one in Leo, and then Sag to Scorpio, fire to water element. My 2018 forecast is going to be January 3rd. I want to say that's a Wednesday. And of course, I've been talking about my Uranus and Taurus series, but before that, I'm going to go into Saturn in Capricorn. And in the midst of this, I'm going to cover Jupiter, Scorpio, Saturn, Capricorn, and of course the Saturn movement towards Pluto in Capricorn. And of course the nodes are going to move into Cancer, Capricorn while Saturn is there. And as we have Saturn and then Jupiter go into Capricorn, they're going to cross over their south nodes. Anyone who is born within the last 75 years has the south node of Pluto in Capricorn. They have the south node of Saturn in Capricorn. They have the south node of Jupiter in Capricorn. So I'm going to include all of that as I move through this Saturn and Capricorn series, which is going to start next Monday. We'll do a 2-part and then we'll do a 3-part going through the 12 houses. So you can still get your links to that from our forecasting webinars page on evolutionaryastrology.net. Here is the listing of all the aspects from beginning to end in chronological order that I spoke about here. I always like to include this list so that you've got it for your usage on the PDF file. Here's the last slide. And so I'd just like to check in comments or questions from anybody on any subject. If you can type it into the chat board for Leroy, or you can raise your hand and he can open your line up. Comments or questions from anybody?
Pretty quiet for a rather large group, so you must have covered a lot of information very completely.
All right, well, let me check my time here. I didn't even pay any attention to the time tonight. I just decided to rattle. Oh boy, I did good rattling. Maybe I should not look at the time anymore. I always try to keep track of the time for everybody.
You forgot to tell them where. You did say forecasting webinars page, didn't you? You get your
Yes.
enrollment there, and immediately in the confirmation email from EAN, you'll have a link to enroll with our webinar service. So here we are, Mercury retrograde. We're having 5 webinars on Saturn and Capricorn in December. So wish us luck.
I don't get to make the, I don't get to make the calendar. The stars make the calendar, okay?
And Saturn and Capricorns are gonna anchor us all the way through December. No problem with that.
It's good. It's going to ground us, and this series, this Saturn and Capricorn is going to take us through 2018, 19, and 2020. Because Saturn is in Capricorn with, again, retrograding back into Sag next year and retrograding into Aquarius back to Capricorn in 2020. We're going to have Saturn in Capricorn 3 years. It'll feel like 3 years, 2018, 19, and 20. So that's what we'll cover with that. So, well, again, everybody, I would just say, The Grand Trine in the fire signs may save us. It may make everybody too impulsive. That mid-December, when Mercury goes stationary, direct, and we have the winter solstice, the sun's ingress into Capricorn along with Saturn, there could be some shakeups and reality calls. I don't know that I would see, maybe if you're from the US and following this Russian collusion investigation, I don't know if I see Robert Mueller ready to come out with more things yet. I think it's too early. I think it's going to maybe be more into next year. So I don't know what we're going to find with this Capricorn. It might be financial. It might be the Republicans pushing through their tax cuts. It might be the situation with North Korea escalating. Regardless of whatever it is, as we said before, you really, really, visualize peace, visualize peace, enough of us collectively doing it, and we know we can change the energy of the world. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to these Mercury retrograde webinars. I, for one, enjoy doing them. So thank you very much. And Leroy will make the recording and the PDFs available to you in the next day or so. Breathe deep, get out in nature, and expand your beliefs through this Mercury retrograde.